Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tenant Talk Live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tenant Talk Live. I just realized that the chat isn't available to everyone, so I'll fix it fast. But feel free to drop your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. We'll get started in just a few minutes, but thank you again for joining Tenant Talk Live. For those that are just joining, feel free to drop your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. Thank you. All right, so we have today joining us, we have AJ joining us from Wisconsin, Barbara joining us from Baton Rouge. Let me see if the captions are working today. We have Sue joining us from Seattle, Dua Rahima joining us from Washington, Dee joining us from Missouri. Awesome. We have Katie joining us from Washington as well. We'll get started in a few minutes here. Also, we have Elizabeth joining us from Washington too, and John joining us from Philly. All right, hello everybody that's just joining us. Feel free to drop your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. We have Mavis joining us from Mississippi. Gary joining us from California. Hello. Amazing, we have Linda joining us from, sorry, we have Linda joining us from rural Minnesota. And we have Robin joining us from Wisconsin. Cool, I think it's kind of slowing down a little bit so we can go ahead and get started for today. So again, hello everyone, thank you for joining Tenant Talk Live this week. My name is Sid Betancourt and I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a housing advocacy organizer with the coalition. And in case you don't know where you are, you're currently attending Tenant Talk Live, where we provide residents and tenants opportunities to connect with NLHC, but also with one another to share best practices around federal housing advocacy and learn how to get more involved, also leading with communities. And today we're going to be hearing from some advocates in Oregon and Wisconsin to learn more about their journeys, just engaging in policy, public policy, and any advice that they have to share with you all. And so we'll be joined by Kevin Cronin, who's the Director of Member Relations and Industry Support at Housing Oregon, and Marlo Fields, who's a housing specialist at WISCAP in Wisconsin. And so really quickly, before we get started, I just want to share a few reminders with you all. I didn't get to share this last time, but I do just want to go ahead and reshare some of our community agreements that we talked about at the beginning of the year. Again, just the platinum rule: treat others the way they want to be treated. In other words, please consider how others want to be treated and how that might differ from how you want to be treated. And then if we invite folks to come from the audience to ask a question, just make sure to mute your mic except when speaking. and then listen with an open mind and empathy. And if you have spoken already, just give other attendees a chance to participate. But if you have anything you want to add to those community agreements or anything you want to change, feel free to put that in the chat or email me afterwards as well. Yeah, I just wanted to reshare those with you all. And then again, this is a reminder, if you're signed up for NLHC emails, you should be receiving an email this Friday titled The Connection, and the e-blast will contain all the recap materials, including the recording, the chat, and any links shared in the chat in that recap email. And before we dive into this session today, I did just want to make sure that I shared my email in the chat in case you wanted to share any thoughts or anything. I think it's in there already. But again, feel free to share any thoughts that you have around community agreements and stuff with us afterwards. But yeah, to get us started today, I'm going to hand it over to our first panelist, Kevin, to start us off. And again, he's joining us from Housing Oregon, and he has a lot of experience, not just working for the organization, but he also does a lot of tenant work. So Kevin, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Sydney, for welcoming me to this. It's such a pleasure to come to Tenant Talk. I get the bi-yearly magazine, and so I'm always excited when it comes in my mailbox. I always read it right away, and then I normally hand it off to folks. Sydney said, my name is Kevin. I use he, him. I work for an organization called Housing Oregon. Housing Oregon is an association of community development associations, housing authorities, and other developers. And I'm the membership coordinator, so I help recruit folks to join the organization, and I provide some advocacy support at the Oregon legislature, and then I got to participate in Hill Day with National Low Income Housing at the most recent summit. I see my girl Marsh is present on the call. She's from Fairview. I got to know her a little bit. She's wonderful. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about my story and how I got to where I am. So I didn't always want to work in housing, but in 2011, while I was going to school, I got no cause evicted from my apartment. We were given 30 days notice. So I was looking through the different ads trying to find a new spot to live, and I found my apartment, and it was listed for $200 more. And I asked if I could just simply pay that much, but they said no. And so I had to move out, and I was unable to find a new place to live. So I became homeless for a couple months. Eventually, I stayed at my friend's house on his back porch in a hammock until I found a new place to live. And that was really hard for me. Just living outside was really tough. And it got me thinking more about housing. So after a few years passed, and I was living in an apartment in downtown Eugene, and in 2015 our entire apartment building was no cause evicted again. And so that was really tough. It wiped out my entire savings, and I was getting really frustrated with this happening to me. So we found a new place just a few blocks away. It was a single family house, and so we got our life situated there. And then my landlord died, and so then the estate came and they sold the house, and I was given another no cause eviction. And so I had to move out again. And luckily I was able to move in with my girlfriend, who is now my wife. And so we're super excited about that. But that gave me the grit and the fire to get involved in the housing fight. And so some of the people I know, we got together and helped start the Springfield Eugene Tenant Association in Eugene. We wanted to have a place where folks could get their questions answered. And so we started a hotline. It's all based on like Google Docs, and I think we have a Nation Builder subscription. But we started this free hotline program for tenants. And I found that it's a good way to like keep people coming into your organization, and by teaching people skills to advocate and help people with their problems, you're building leaders in the tenant movement. So that's been going on for a little while. And the Springfield Eugene Tenant Association has grown pretty strong. And so after that experience, I was like, hey, I want to work professionally in housing. So I worked at my local housing authority, working with folks on Section 8, helping people do annual recertifications. And that was really rewarding. I got to meet so many interesting people and learn a lot about their lives, and help them find places to live and share my struggles. Our local city started talking about, hey, what can we do for more renter protections? And so we looked at some places around, and looks like Portland had, which is the big city in Oregon, and I live in Eugene, which is the second largest city. They passed a big bill of tenant protections, and so we decided that we wanted to do the same at our city. And so one of the things on there was capping application fees at $10. And so this was an idea that like everybody sort of understood right away. Homeowners and other people that weren't necessarily in our movement, they really understood like, oh yeah, people are getting fleeced on their application fees. We had a Craigslist post that we circulated that was, someone was charging $75 per head to apply for an apartment, and there was 40 people applying, and that's insane. So we put out an online petition, and we made paper copies as well. We made one in Spanish, and we started circulating that, and we got a bunch of interest. And so we were able to call the people on the petition, organize them, and we started showing up at city council meetings and advocating for these new tenant protections. And that spurred a lot of reaction on part of the landlords, but also we got a really good response from our city council members. So one of the things that we did was then we started meeting with figuring out where all of our tenants lived in relation to their elected officials. And then we started setting up these Zoom meetings where we would invite the elected official, and then we would invite everyone that also lived in that same sort of ward. And then we would hold a phone bank, we would call through all the people and invite them. And we'd have about 25-30 people come and meet their city councilor and talk about what's going on at their rental, how much they had to pay in application fees, things like security deposits, those types of things. And so we were able to tell our stories, and I think that we were able to build up a lot of support for passing a new tenant protection bill at our city level. So July of last year, or in June, we had a hearing. We crushed it. We had about 20-1 tenants to landlords testify at this hearing, and our city council was able to pass renter protections phase 1. And so that gave us about a third of what we were going for. And we started to say, hey, well, maybe we can make some change at our state level too. So we had never really worked with the Portland tenant unions. or people from around the state on different issues, and we wanted to do that. And so we decided that in September of last year, our state sort of set what is the maximum rent threshold that you could charge someone for an increase. And so our state, we have rent stabilization, where you can charge someone a new increase of 7% plus the consumer price index. So as many of you know, last year we had a bunch of inflation, and that really sucked. It hit us at the grocery store, but it also came out in our rent. And so we started seeing 14.6% rent increases. And then our state has a couple of carve outs for rent stabilization. So some of the new construction, we were seeing $800 a month increases, and some really crazy stuff. So we said, hey, let's team up with the Portland people. We decided that we wanted to call a statewide tenant assembly. And so people were into it. And it was really interesting having one-on-one meetings with some of the other tenant groups around the state. Some of the tenant groups, they did not like the other tenant groups. And that was really interesting to hear that some people really disagreed about what was going on in our movement. And, you know, there's hard feelings and lots of history, but, you know, we kept talking about our rent increases, and we started talking about the seniors at the Eugene Hotel, which is a apartment building that's just for seniors, and those people had to move out. We saw 6 people move out due to the rent increases, and we decided that we were going to try to work together as a state with all the different tenant groups, and so we put on a tenant assembly. It was on Zoom, and the first 5 minutes, the entire Zoom meeting got full to capacity. We were blown away that people really wanted to participate. People really wanted to fight back against the rent hikes. So we started circulating a statewide petition, and really started building up our email lists and our phone lists of people that wanted to get involved on this issue. And with the help of the Oregon Law Center, we were able to introduce this year's Senate Bill 611, which would cap rent at 3% plus CPI or inflation, and set a maximum increase cap of that of 8%. So quite different from that 14%. And so we've been advocating for that. Our tenant assembly has gotten all the different tenant groups in Oregon working together. We meet every other Friday at noon to sort of talk about different issues that are popping up. Our legislative session is going on right now, and so I think it ends in June. And so we've had a bunch of different bills come up. The first priority for us was the eviction prevention bill. It came up, and we were able to pass 10-day 10-day non-payment evictions. So essentially, before, you'd have 72 hours, they could file paperwork, take you to court, and now that timeline is a lot longer. And so we have a lot of rural areas in Oregon, and people they just didn't have enough time to get a lawyer. And so this bill actually increases those timelines. And so now people are able to find a lawyer and be represented in court. And I'm sure that that's going to have a significant impact. The other thing is that it included state level rent assistance. And so we're making sure that if you're able to pay your landlord up until your court date, it's all forgiven. And there's a way to expunge that eviction so it doesn't sort of show up on your permanent record. We're very excited about that. And we're still holding out for rent control coming up here our bill has moved out of the committee, and we're waiting on a floor vote in the Senate. It's been watered down a little bit, and that's a little bit disappointing. But it's, there's a lot of landlords, unfortunately, in the Senate, and as we've discovered, there's only one tenant that is in the Oregon legislature, which was really surprising to us. That everybody else is a homeowner or a landlord, and that really speaks to the level of concern that they have for tenant protections, and that we have made a lot of noise in the advocacy realm, and making sure that they pay attention to us. So we're really excited about that. We're excited to keep the momentum going. And at the local level, we're pushing for Eugene Renter Protection Phase 2, which includes relocation assistance, similar to what folks down in LA won back in February. So we're really excited to looking at seeing what other people have done. I don't know if folks on this call have checked out National Low Income Housing's like a race tenant protection spreadsheet, but I have that bookmarked, and I go and I look at that every couple of weeks to see if there's any new ideas that are popping up around the country that we can look at adopting here. We're really excited about the folks up in Portland that are putting together their national right to count, their sort of Multnomah County, which is the big Portland County, right to counsel legislation, and that's on the ballot in May. So folks from Eugene, we're going to go up there. We're going to knock on some doors and help them get out the vote to hopefully win that for that county. So we want to make sure that we have everybody's back, and just be there in solidarity for others, even if we sort of have some maybe different approaches, right, to things, and we might have different levels of radicalism. But we know that what's good for tenants at the end of the day is something that we can all stand behind. So it's been tricky, but really it's been a blessing to get to know and learn from all of these wonderful people from around the state, and get involved. So I think I'm gonna cut myself off there and turn it back over to Sydney, but thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it and look forward to some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kevin. And it's really inspiring to hear this story from you, and to, a lot of folks in the chat are also very excited. Might follow up with you later, so I will ask some more questions to dig a little bit deeper later, but we'll go ahead and bring on our next guest for today. We have Marlo Field joining us from WISCAP, and you can feel free to take it.
Hey, thanks, Sid, and Kevin, great job. Thank you. I learned a lot from what you just said. So apologize in advance for my voice. Between having 4 seasons and 2 days here in Wisconsin, and watching our favorite Greek freak take a big fall yesterday, I think I lost my voice, but as did about half of the state when he fell. But he'll be back, don't worry, in the Bucks and 6. So thanks so much. Yep, Marlo Fields, he, him pronouns. And I work as a housing specialist at WISCAP. WISCAP is the Wisconsin Community Action Program Association. So we are the statewide network of 16 community action agencies in the state, and 2 statewide organizations as well. And for those of you who aren't familiar with community action agencies, in short, I'm not going to give too long of a history lesson, but they were more or less we are the continuation of the vehicles that were used during Lyndon B. Johnson's war on poverty. So they came about through the 1960s and 70s and made huge dividends and dents into both urban, suburban, and rural poverty in the nation. And to this day, we do our agencies do a plethora of work throughout the country. I believe 99% of counties are represented by community action agencies, and they do everything from Head Start is probably what a lot of folks know of community action agencies. Food banks. Our community action agencies do weatherization for homes and housing navigating for homeless or those facing homelessness. And then on top of that, as well as job and business development as well. So getting folks who maybe fell behind on schools or studies, that they just need that extra boost to get ahead and get that next degree and make it up that next bracket and escape poverty. Our whole mission is to to combat poverty in any which way we can in every community in every corner of our state. So my role with that is to work with our housing team to primarily our agencies were the main distributors of the emergency rental assistance funds that were available through the COVID bills, such as the American Rescue Plan and the CARES Act. We've distributed over $250 million to $250 million in the non-entitlement counties. So that would be Madison and Milwaukee and Green Bay and Waukesha County for those familiar with Wisconsin. So every other county outside of that, we've distributed about $250 million in rental assistance dollars that have kept people in their house during this pandemic. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. Without those federal dollars coming through, thousands of people would have been out on the streets, and many of them would have been facing the hardships of homelessness. And what that does to families and children in particular. And then also helping distribute the housing, we call it the Wisconsin Help for Homeowners. It's the distribution of ARPA funds to essentially keep people in their house who maybe fell behind on mortgage payments, property taxes, utilities, all that such during the pandemic. And it's available for up to $40,000 one-time grant or loan. And we've distributed about $40 million in those funds as well. So that's some of the work that I do. And then we also do, like I said, weatherization, which is the going into people's homes, low-income folks' homes, if they qualify, and updating their energy services, whether that be new windows, new insulation, which helps keep those energy bills down, saving people anywhere up to $100 to $500 a year, which once again, when we're talking about the lowest income folks, that's massive, especially over the lifetime of that. And then it's also a way to also combat climate change, which, as many of us know, affects those of us at the lower income the highest. And then in addition to all that, we are, one of my key focuses is on advocacy, and we've been working with the National Low Income Housing Coalition on that. I guess to take a step back, before I got into how I got into housing was I used to work for the local congressman here, Representative Mark Pocan, who represents Madison area of the state, the 2nd Congressional District. And I was tasked with constituent services and outreach. And one of my areas was dealing with HUD and housing information. Before that, I grew up in a relatively low income family myself. My single mother with 4 siblings. My mother was a factory worker, but the one thing we always had, we didn't have much, but we did have a stable home, and that allowed me. Now looking back, when you're inundated with all the data on stable housing, how important that is towards the success of youth, families, and such. So I got really interested in this kind of quiet crisis that I think millions of people know is going on in our nation and has been, for decades, but really percolated during the 2008 housing crisis and never really fixed itself after that. And it's something that a lot of people know about, but there, at least in Wisconsin, there doesn't seem to be a ton of advocacy on housing, whether that be for low income folks in particular, but also for middle income folks and housing in general. We are just not building enough for the need. And like I said, the compounding effects of that on a state and a nation and communities is staggering. So I got tricked into working here WISCAP because my passion kind of changed towards housing, because without a stable home, a trajectory for many folks is just not that good. So with our work with NLIHC, we've been doing, since I was brought on last March, our goal is to build a statewide advocacy network that hate to pull Marco Rubio, my throat is just killing me. So to build a statewide network for advocacy, we are building that out. Before, and the impetus came from a Home for Everyone conference that we were able to attend, that was sponsored and hosted by the Wisconsin Housing Partnership, who is a state level partner of NLIHC as well. And through that, and some of the other grants that we've gotten, we were able to do 3 listening sessions on housing at various parts of our state. I don't think Wisconsin's unique in many of these facets, other than our state really does have a mixed population of rural, urban, and suburban populations, which have vastly different challenges, albeit in many ways somewhat similar, even though they have similar threads. The approach of housing justice for rural communities and urban communities just tends to be divided and discussed a lot in our state. And so we wanted to bring everybody together. We wanted to, cast a big net at WISCAP. Our priority is always going to be the lowest income folks. But we understand that it's going to take a lot of concerned actors, and there are, coming together to attack the crisis. And one of the ways that we've done that is we participated in the Capitol Hill Day, which was great. I myself and about 7 other folks were able to reach out and talk to 4 of our congressional delegation here in Wisconsin, bipartisan Republicans and Democratic coalitions. And among other things, among the other like national low-income housing goals that we had for that, we were able to talk about other housing needs in Wisconsin, like many other states. For those of you who don't know, Wisconsin is pretty bipartisan state by many metrics, but through gerrymandering, it has become I don't want to say a banana republic, but the GOP-led legislature is able to stop and not do, in my opinion, their job of legislating. And there seems to be a lot of bipartisan gridlock that prevents a lot of things from happening, especially when it comes to housing rights. So we wanted to talk about the uptick in criminalization of homelessness, which we've seen bills introduced in our state legislature. We had a big election in November that secured a Democratic governor for another 4 years. That all of those bills will be vetoed, so we don't think that they're going to be popping up in the next 4 years. But we want all of our legislators to be in the know on that. And then apart from the advocacy we do through NLIHC, use acronyms, NLIHC. Apart from that, we also do a decent amount of advocacy at the state level, meeting with our state representatives. We hosted a Capitol Hill Day, or sorry, not Capitol Hill Day, but Madison Hill Day earlier in March, where we introduced aspects of our Wisconsin Opportunity Act, which would increase funding for a lot of sectors, including housing, renter assistance, and food stability, health stability within the state. We went and talked to all of our legislators. I forget the exact number of how many we reached, but we had about 30 participants going from just like a miniature Capitol Hill Day, just from office to office, advocating on that behalf. So, and then additionally, like I said, we hosted 3 listening sessions on poverty, and through one of those listening sessions, we were able to work with a group in Milwaukee, and we were able to contract with them into introducing a tenant bill of rights for the city of Milwaukee. Wisconsin is one of the most heavily segregated states in the union. To this day, the racial disparities, even by Midwestern standards, are higher than our surrounding neighbors. And that's something that, especially as a person of color, I'm not exactly proud of my state. And nothing exemplifies that more than what I call the war on Milwaukee in our state, where the majority of people of color live are going to be in Milwaukee, our largest city, and Madison, our second largest city, which has some of the highest incarceration rates for what we consider a liberal progressive haven. There's lots of racial disparities, and part of that, besides just the criminal aspect of that, or the policing aspect of that and whatnot, is the fact that where these folks live are some of the most rundown places in America, and some of the most unsafe areas in America. And housing has a large part to do with that. We see real estate goblins, as I call them, come in and swoop up and take whole neighborhoods, and home ownership is next to impossible for young families of color in this state. And that's a shame. And so introducing a tenant bill of rights, like something, or a renter's bill of rights, was huge in our work. In Milwaukee, landlords can rent an apartment without a refrigerator, without a stove. And I had never heard of that before. I didn't think that was legal, but it is. And we're seeing an increase of landlords taking advantage of renters. And we've seen rent increases like none other, especially in Madison, but also Milwaukee. And it's affecting thousands of Wisconsinites every day. So we worked to introduce that. We had some backing by some Milwaukee city elders. Unfortunately, Wisconsin has pretty strict, the state laws supersede a lot of they supersede, they don't leave a lot of room for municipal autonomy for raising funds and dealing with a lot of issues. So, but what we can do is bring awareness to this, and make it an issue, and make it something that, as I always say, our relationship with legislatures and the powers that be shouldn't always, and often, in my opinion, shouldn't be comfortable ones always. And they're only going to be, they're only going to move the needle when you're knocking on the door and demanding change on that. So that's a tidbit of what I have to say. I'll cut myself off now, otherwise I'll go ranting for a while and my voice will be more gone. So
No worries at all, Marlo, and please, please feel free to take a little break too, and I'll go ahead and get to some questions too that I think we had for Kevin. I had some pre-written questions for you both, but we did have like a lot of enthusiasm from the chat and the Q&A feature. So I think I'm gonna try to go through those first, and then maybe we can invite one or two people from the audience to come off mute. But for Kevin, I think we had some questions remaining from your segment as well, but we did have Marianne ask, like when you were homeless, did you were able to find legal aid, or how did that like process, I guess, go for you if you were able to find legal aid? Because I know that's something that a lot of folks ask us for daily, and we don't provide direct services at NLIHC, but we know that that's something that folks come into contact with a lot and might not be like the easiest system to navigate.
Yeah, so I did reach out to the legal aid affiliate in my county, and unfortunately, due to the way that no cause evictions work, is that there isn't really a lot that legal aid can do for you, unfortunately, and it's really hard to challenge and win in court a no cause eviction, and that's why we really need to fight for just cause evictions, is so that you can actually challenge and have a real defense in court. And so unfortunately, it was not very helpful for my situation, but Oregon has since limited no cause evictions to 4 specific scenarios, and my hope is, and my mission is to get rid of those as well. So I'm not going to stop until no one gets no cause evicted in my state.
And it's like a long process too, so I appreciate the advocacy that you are doing over there for that as well. There was another question that we had in the Q&A portion that was asking, so we had like a few that were kind of talking about how there's like a lot of frustrating issues in housing discrimination cases, in transitional housing, you know, lack of safety, and just like bringing up a lot of issues, but just like feeling an overall frustration with not knowing like what to do. And we also had somebody else in the Q&A ask for some advice around getting tenants organized. And I think, you know, kind of like that frustration and also getting folks organized are kind of tied together. At least I feel like it kind of is connected a bit. And I kind of wanted to see if both of you would be able to speak to that as well.
Well, to the first part, and the answer is right there. The second question was about tenant organizing. So the first part is, you know, if you are frustrated, you're not the only one, and you need to begin organizing. And it might start out as simple as talking to your neighbors, talking to your friends who are probably also feeling the squeeze as well, and finding commonality, which, you know, one of the beautiful things about organizing today in the modern age is that we are connected a lot through social media and other means, and that is such a beautiful tool for organizing. It means you're also competing with a lot of other things and a lot of attentions and stuff, but like the actual tools are in front of us to organize at a level that is unimaginable, really, and can be so rapid and such. So I would just always tell people that if you're frustrated, use that energy, use that frustration, and organize. So, Kevin.
So yeah, I mean, I know that there's a lot of different frustrations, and I'm sorry that that's happening to you. In terms of talking about organizing, though, I think that there's some really basic things that you have, that everyone on this call has, that you can employ to increase your success. So the first is, I would tell your personal story, and that's really powerful, and it's one of the tools that's my go-to, is telling my personal story and building a connection with other people. So that's how it starts. And then the next thing is like doing a hard ask and asking people to commit to do one action to either help you or to take one action that would mean something. So you could ask them to sign your petition. And that's a good way because you'll get their email address and their phone number, and you can follow up and contact them later when, hey, I talked to you about this one issue. It's really important to you. Like, we're going to take another action. Can you join us? And so if you boil down organizing in a nutshell, it's like you're just going to use those two things and a variety of different mediums, and getting people to take action in some sort of way. And there's different ways, and you can be very creative about what actions you take, and that's part of the fun of organizing. But you just got to start with the building blocks.
Thank you so much, Marlo and Kevin, for that that insight too. I think it's really important. We've had some folks also just kind of asking, I think earlier in the chat, Jennifer Mohawk shared a little bit about how, you know, the opposition is very aware that there's strength in numbers and will use old divide and conquer tactics against us when possible. Do you have any tips on strengthening our networks? Oh, sorry, my dog also had feedback to provide on the question, I suppose.
So, sorry, the question was, sorry.
Oh, no, it's, do you have any tips on strengthening our network?
So this is something that, you know, I'm relatively new to network building, and we're building this thing out in Wisconsin, and we're kind of building the bike as we're riding it, as we like to say. But I think one of the core things out, and it's not always the most fun thing, but to talk about, to come to have core values that people actually are bought into, that, you know, especially if you're trying to cast a large net, and get a lot of folks, then you have to have at least the few tenants that everybody agrees on that they strongly are committed to. And another way too is to have some proverbial skin in the game as well, whether that's a tangential participation agreement or money doesn't hurt to have also in the game as well to keep people bonded. But I would be interested to hear, Kevin, if you have answers too, because we're figuring that challenge out. And we as you know, WISCAP, we're always trying to push the envelope maybe towards the most progressive, at least for the lowest income of folks, which, you know, I think a lot of people would say that low income housing is a priority as well, but doesn't always pan out with what you can get across, especially bipartisan wise, especially when you're looking for some real housing wins, right? Like in nuggets, sometimes the lower income folks tend to be forgotten in those regards.
So when it comes to strengthening your network, I think I like to think about it in two different ways. One is like, what are you doing to strengthen your network in your sort of town? And then what are you doing to strengthen your network as part of a bigger coalition? And so I'm going to take them each in hand. So in town, one of the things that we did was people felt lonely. It was the pandemic when we started organizing. People did, like, we haven't talked to people on a regular basis, right? And so we had a testimony potluck, right? When we went to go talk to the city, we had everybody, we asked one of the local union halls if we could set up in there, and we had a couple tables, everybody brought some food, and we're all spread out. And then we had a raffle where the union was going to pay someone's utility bill for that month, because everybody pays utilities, right? So if you come, you show up, you put your name in the raffle, you might win your utility bill paid. And that way, whenever someone was called, because we were all testifying via Zoom, we would all cheer for them as soon as they were done. And it felt really, really good. And we were able to build support in the room and make everybody feel good about participating. And it was really great. On sort of the more coalition level, It's difficult. People, when you work with different groups, especially groups that are not tenant groups, they all have different priorities, and it's not necessarily your priorities. And so, talking through and making sure that everybody gets a chance and a space to feel heard and an opportunity to share what they want out of this meeting, and making sure that you structure meetings to make sure that they accomplish a little of everybody's goal. That way you keep moving forward and you can sort of check back in and say, hey, we set out at the beginning of this meeting to talk about this and this, and accomplish these people's goals. So one of our goals working with statewide people was to connect to other people, because we feel like we were fighting this battle against landlords by ourselves, right? And so that was the big thing that we wanted. And so it was good to just keep that in mind and center that as we went through building a bigger coalition.
I want to thank my co-panelists, Kevin and Marlo, for your various suggestions and insights. But I also want to share the importance of organizing, but starting in your building or starting in your neighborhood. Just one or two or three people. And your theme or your mantra would be safe, healthy homes. We all want safe and healthy homes, and we start there. Now, what works here in New York, or what has worked in the past, is many of the grocery chains would give X number of gift cards, food gift cards. And we would use that as an incentive to get people to come to the meetings and to learn what they can do. We would have postcards, and we would tell each person that showed up, write 1 or 2 lines about what you need to have a peaceful home, enjoyment of your home. And we would address them to our local council members, state as well as our federal. And when they realized, because they had a return address, that they would receive a response from the elected official, this empowered them to do more. They were able to knock on doors, call different agencies for assistance. And I encourage everybody to join the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Become a member. It's little as $1. And also NAT, National Alliance of HUD Tenants, where you get guidance, where you get support, and where you get information. Go to HUD's website and look at the regulations. And the most important regulation is the 24 CFR 964. It lets you know what you're entitled to as a HUD public housing resident or a Section 8 resident. And you start there, because every state is different. The needs in Oregon is different from the needs in New York versus the needs in Alabama. So when you are a member of a coalition, you can come together and you would get the support that you need. For example, the National Housing Law Project in San Francisco will give you guidance when you need legal support. They can direct you to a local agency in your respective town to give you guidance. But organize, 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 organize. That's the most important step. And you can start small and expand. And when you have agencies such as the coalition and that to give you guidance, I think that's it helps considerably. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. B. And for folks who don't know who Mrs. B is, she's one of our board members and also a member of our tenant leader cohort. We've had tech issues in the past, so she's like an honorary panelist now because we can't work it out through the back end. But a really good insight as always, Mrs. B, and thank you for joining us and sharing that information and for giving us some promo and for giving Matt some promo too. There was one more question I wanted to ask to both Marlo and Kevin before we wrap up for today. And again, I'm sorry I wasn't able to get through all of the questions today, everyone, but y'all were so engaged and it's so exciting to see everybody getting involved in this. But the first, it's a two-part question, but feel free to answer whichever question you have insight on. But this comes from V. Sanchez in the Q&A box, and it says, question 1, what type of history and inner conflict was happening in organizing a statewide tenant assembly? Essentially, what are the things that deorganize tenants? And then the second part of that question is, how did you overcome this? Or if it's being managed right now.
I think this question is addressed to me, but so I'm just gonna start and say, yeah, so there had been some conflicts between tenant organizations in Portland that sort of disagree about how to the direction of the movement. I know that in Eugene, we have the Springfield Eugene Tenant Association. And then we also have the Eugene Housing and Neighborhood Defense called HAND. And they're a little bit more radical, and they believe in more direct action things, and they explicitly state that they don't believe in organizing through like a legislative process. And so we definitely respect that, and we want to make sure that they have space to represent that viewpoint. However, we're focused on working through the legislative process, and so we try to find some common ground on like what do you care about, what services are important to the people that you're serving, right? And so our people are facing habitability concerns. How can we help address those, right? And so how can we make like a handout or a sheet to help people follow the city hoops to report habitability concerns, right? And so by engaging like that, when we have some very differing viewpoints, and just being and holding respect for other people that might have different political views from you, I think was very helpful in working together to build and have a joint event.
Thank you so much, Kevin. We had a lot of good feedback and questions again in the chat and in the Q&A, so I'm going to save these and hopefully we can get to them afterwards and we can follow up and put them in the recap email. I know, Marlo, you just unmuted, so I want to make sure I give you the chance to also share some feedback on that question.
Yeah, no, I think Kevin nailed it, and my organizing isn't as much towards the tenant realm of things, so I would feel out of place answering that question. But I guess in general, as far as like just organizing and keeping solidarity and not breaking apart, I think something that we are always fighting here is like I said, when you're building a large tent, there are a lot of folks that are trying to come to the table, and they might have disagreements on those things. So making sure that you are well positioned and faithful to the core of your values and whatnot, and you hash those things out, and it sometimes can be uncomfortable conversations within your coalition and whatnot. But if you're all coming about it at the same angle and wanting the same outcomes, then those uncomfortable conversations are worth it. You
I
get
do-
past those butterflies in your stomach. So
I do-
Sid, there was a question in the chat box. I believe from Ms. Rhodes, with regard to retaliation for starting a tenant group.
Yes.
I personally had an experience in my building. It was a LIHTC building, and the building manager said that we could not organize. And I provided the manager with the federal regulation stating that we could. And since they're receiving federal monies, we were allowed. But as security as backup, I went to my council member, and my council member sent a letter to the landlord, a cease and desist letter, and told them that they are required to allow us to have a tenant association. And if not, they would be subject to being sued. Well, with the sue word, they allowed us and we went forward. Now, we were able to take the landlord to housing court because there were problems with heat, trash, superintendent, etc. And we were able to prevail without retaliation. So when you fight, you win. And all it takes at least 3 or 4 people. Just remember that. When you fight, you will win. And you go to your elected officials and you tell them, you come to us when you want to be reelected. So we come to you because we need these protections, and hold their feet to the fire. And I promise you, by your being persistent, you will prevail. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. B. And that was actually, I was actually going to address that comment too. And in addition to Karen's comment, I also just want to just commend like the bravery of a lot of folks who do this work and are often put in danger, because I know a lot of folks mentioned that in the chat. It's not easy. There's a lot of wins that we talk about on these calls, but there's also like a lot of lows that come with this work, and it's not easy. And I appreciate y'all for being vulnerable in the chat as well. But yeah, I know we're at time already. We went a few minutes over, but Marlo or Kevin, did you want to share like one word or like a phrase that you want folks to kind of take away for today's call before I wrap it up?
yeah, I would just say I just put it in the chat that these legislatures, people in quote unquote power, they are only there in this country because we put them there. And that I've worked for 2 members of Congress and I enjoyed my time with them and they were great folks, but there's nothing special about them. They do there's nothing towering about them, and you shouldn't be afraid to be yourself, to be authentic, and know that you are the ones that are correct and right on these issues. And because you are living in it, and it's their job to listen to you. And if they don't listen, you make them listen.
I really appreciate everyone in the chat sharing their story about struggles in organizing, and I have definitely felt that too. I've had landlords call my boss, try to get me fired, and I've seen some of our members speak up and get no cause evicted and targeted, and that's very real. And we got to celebrate the wins when we get them, and that we sometimes we won't win on the first go. It took us I think 4 or 5 times to get rent stabilization through the legislature. It took us several times. So don't give up and persevere, because find your motivation, and my motivation is spite. I'm going to get no cause evictions banned in Oregon, and I'm not going to stop until I do. And so find whatever motivates you. and keep going.
So thank you both so much for joining us today and for staying a little bit over. But thank you both, and thank you to the attendees that joined us today. And as always, if you have any recommendations or suggestions for future Tenant Talk Lives, please feel free to email me. I'll drop that in the chat, or Gabby will drop it in the chat. Thank you, Gabby. And then I'll have a few reminders for today. So again, we are going to be doing Tenant Talk Live webinars twice a month now. So our next one will be on May 1st at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And then our next one will be on May 15th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. We have to switch the schedule around a little bit just because of scheduling conflicts with panelists. So our next session on May 1st will be on Section 9 housing. So get everybody in public housing out, spread the word. And then May 15th I'll be on, again, very similar to this webinar, but we're gonna have some folks kind of just speaking about building relationships with congressional offices and also federal agencies. And then we're gonna have a Section 3 webinar on June 5th. So that'll be the order of it, and we'll change it on the website so that it reflects it on the schedule, but I just wanted to verbally say that right now. And again, if you wanna be a contributor on our tenant blog, it's called we have like an on the home front blog for NLIHC, but we have guest authors that can write about their experience or just their federal housing advocacy, and you can feel free to outreach or email outreach@nlhc.org to contribute to that. And we also have our Facebook page that you can join to stay in touch with one another. And again, that's all I have for tonight, but thank you again for joining everybody, and we'll see you on May 1st for our next webinar. Thank you all.
Bye-bye, everybody. Stay safe. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Marlo. Thank you, Sydney.
Thank you, Mrs. B.
And thank you all attendees.